By Christmas, I'll be sipping champagne in Tuscany with your money, my sister said, laughing like she owned the season. She said it standing in my kitchen, one perfectly manicured hand wrapped around an Armani clutch that I had bought her 2 years earlier because I thought family mattered. Her voice bounced off the marble backsplash. My Ring doorbell had captured the grin on her face and the way Dad's eyes ducked away when she counted imaginary bills on her fingers. Everyone in the room nodded like they were already signing for a first-class ticket. It felt like a scene from a movie, except this was my life, my money, my health, and I was the butt of a joke. "You're too stupid to even see what's coming," my mother added, like a kicker on a touchdown. "You know how the world works, son. Families help families." That's the part that cut the deepest, the sanctimonious language of help, when every text and every visit had been a demand. "We raised you," they'd say. "You owe us." Funny thing, no one mentioned how they'd stopped paying child support when I was a teenager, or the way they'd sold my old trophies to cover a gambling debt. Funny thing, no one mentioned those things when they wanted me to sign over accounts or wire tens of thousands for medical expenses for cousins I'd never met. I sat there and listened. I smiled. Because what else do you do when the people who should protect you are haggling over your kidneys like consignment items? I smiled and let them assume the power, but I had a secret they didn't know. Little did they know, I had already been planning moves none of them could see. "You're going to cut the house up and rent the Tesla for parts," my brother said, joking. He thought this conversation was a performance. He didn't know the probate lawyer I had called 3 nights earlier, or the private investigator who had been tailing their accountant for 6 months. "By the way," my sister said, leaning forward, "we'll need a little advance, maybe $1 million. You know how it is." I remember thinking, $1 million? They act like I'm printing money. They act like I woke up one morning and bought an Aspen vacation home because Zillow told me to. I listened while they named dollar amounts like they were writing a shopping list. The house was worth, what the public records said, around $12 million. My stake in the family business and a few outside investments put my net worth in the low hundreds of millions. The estate people talk about in tabloids was nothing like mine. This wasn't an $847 million estate, but it was mine. It was enough to make them salivate. "Look," I said finally. My voice was calm. I'm good at that when my chest is on fire. "You don't get to extort me in my own kitchen." She looked at me like I'd told a joke. "Excuse me? Who are you to talk about extortion? You think you can cut us out? We raised you. We put you through school." "That's called a loan I never asked for," I said. "And by the way, the prenup I signed when I married Eliza. Do you remember that? You never read it, but I did." "You're going to take me for everything you've got," my sister snapped, adopting the lines she'd used in boardrooms like they'd been taught to her. She wanted to flip the script, to get me on defense. Her arrogance was deliciously vile. I let her bluster. I let her think she had me. But 2 months earlier, I'd been handed a different kind of knife. A doctor's note no one expected. I'd been diagnosed with a terminal condition. Not some melodramatic Hollywood countdown, but a clean, clinical timeline from a Seattle oncologist who had said, "You should put your affairs in order. You've got about a year." I didn't tell them that night, not yet. There was a plan inside me that required them to be fully themselves, greedy, unfiltered, careless. If they knew I was dying, they'd switch tactics. They'd get schooled in people who were dying and their supposed caretakers. They'd show restraint, so I let them eat. "How about we draw up an agreement now?" my brother suggested. "If you want to be generous, leave us something. Just a letter, you know? We all love you." I nodded like I always did. I opened my phone and pretended to scroll through emails. I remember thinking, we've all felt that betrayal in different forms. Someone who smiles in your face and counts you out later. Anyone who's been through divorce or a messy will fight knows that feeling. Have you ever felt a loved one treat your assets like plates at a buffet? Has someone ever told you family meant show up with a credit card? Tell me, what would you have done sitting at that table, watching people barter pieces of you? But I had no idea what I was about to discover, and I had no idea how much further they'd go. 2 nights after that dinner, I woke up to my phone buzzing. It was a notification from a cloud backup app I'd forgotten was set to recover deleted texts. I didn't go to bed planning to peep through someone's messages. I don't condone snooping, unless there are $12 million houses and Teslas at stake. And apparently, I have relatives who believe in using every excuse to take what isn't theirs. What I pulled up changed everything. There were 47 deleted messages between my sister and our longtime family accountant. Messages that until then only existed in their safe little conspiracy. One line said, "He's so stupid, he'll never suspect." Another, "Just 3 more months and we settle the trust." Another, "We need to create a fake medical bill. The insurer will never check." 47 deleted messages. 2 years of lies. The threads had every ugly word you'd expect. Planned asset transfers to shell companies, forged signatures, discussions about hiring a caretaker who'd be complicit, and mentions of money moved offshore to accounts in Nevada and Belize. "We'll set it up like a pet trust," one message read. "No judge will take the dog over us." I sat in my dark living room. The Oculus on the coffee table glinted. The Ring doorbell had not only captured family dinners, but also parked cars, bank couriers, and the neighbor's landscaper, who was suddenly suspiciously chatty with my sister. I remember thinking, security footage doesn't lie. The camera was watching them like a patient jury that had finally leaned forward. You won't believe what I found next. But then, I also knew I had a ticking clock on my hands. What happened next was this. I hired Margaret Chen, the divorce and probate shark from Bellevue everyone uses when the stakes are insane. I'd met her through an associate at a tech fund, and she'd told me in no uncertain terms that she loved messy family law. "This is exactly my thing," she said over a coffee that cost me $12. She had sat me down, thumbs steepled, and said, "We could hand this to a judge, but you need a layer of dust. We move assets to a trust, we set a pet trust, and we make the terms explicit. But, and this is the hardest part, you have to make them believe they're winning until they don't." "But you just said you were dying," Margaret said quietly, almost like it was the logical step in a strategy. "If you want them to underestimate you, you have to control the narrative." That's when the idea hardened into a plan. I would reveal the diagnosis, publicly, in a way that made them smell inevitability. They'd swoop in, they'd pick the bones. Then, in front of a judge, I'd pull the rug. We'd present the messages, the ring footage, the bank transfer receipts. We'd show the suspicious shell corporations. We'd show intent. I can sense you asking, wait, how does a dying man pull off an elaborate estate trap with shell companies and text messages? Fair, you'd be right to be skeptical. There were 3 times where I nearly had to abandon the whole thing. First setback. My sister found out I'd been talking to an investigator. She confronted my investigator at a cafe in Capitol Hill. Yes, the guy accidentally tweeted his latte. And suddenly our lead started crying at the idea of being subpoenaed. "If I go down with you," he said, "they'll ruin me." I lost my best source of inside intel for 3 weeks. Second setback, the bank where my liquid assets were kept froze transfers after a whistleblower flagged odd activity. Suddenly, funds for the trust couldn't be moved without a court order. Margaret and I were told we'd need a power of attorney in place or an emergency petition. In short, the wheels ground to a halt. It felt like walking uphill with my shoes glued to the pavement. Third setback. 2 days before we planned to reveal the will, my brother hired a high-profile litigator from Seattle who'd represented celebrities. He filed for protective conservatorship and claimed I lacked capacity to set up new trusts or make gifts because of emotional duress linked to my diagnosis. The judge could have put me under a temporary restraining order that would freeze everything. If that had held, their access would be legally protected. It was terrifying. For about 48 hours, I felt like I was in a collapsing house. But then, what happened next changed course. Margaret worked a loophole: pet trusts. In Washington state, you can create a trust for the maintenance of an animal. The trust appoints a trustee and a caregiver. Money doesn't go to the dog per se, but to the trust, with the pet's care as the primary purpose. We made details ironclad. Trustee was an independent Seattle-based NGO known for animal welfare, with a famous vet as an overseer, and the caregiver clause named a childhood friend who had literally rescued my dog from under a porch during a storm. We added surveillance clauses, ring footage, GPS trackers, and mandatory quarterly reports on expenditures and vet visits. A trust can't be bribed. A trustee is fiduciary. Banks have to comply. Judges hate being made fools of in open court, so we fortified everything. I also did something petty, deliciously petty. I wired a relatively small sum to my sister's corporation with a note for emergency expenses, non-refundable. She immediately counted it as proof of control and started spending it. The bait worked. She relaxed. Then I made the messiest, cruelest reveal possible. I went to dinner with them again. I told them the diagnosis, breath held like I was defusing a bomb. Their faces were a mixture of sympathy and calculation. They moved in for the kill. They told me, we're family. We were told to be caretakers. They'd be responsible if I needed financial help. They'd manage my care. They hugged me and kissed my forehead. They started trying to get me to sign new forms. And then, right there over the lamb and roasted carrots, I said, I'll do you one better. I'm not signing anything. What's going to happen is this. When I'm gone, my estate goes into a pet trust for Otis, my dog. The trust is funded with everything I own. Silence. A fork clattered. My mother nearly choked. My sister's eyes slid from the plate to me and then to her phone like she was live streaming the moment. You can't do that, my brother hissed. His jaw passed through 3 colors. Why not? I asked. Did you think the law was just for you? She tried to laugh it off. You can't be serious. Who will care for a dog that inherits a $20 million trust? Someone appointed by the trustee, I said slowly. And the trustee is required to monitor you. The trust requires video documentation of visits and receipts for any purchase over $500. The trust funds can't be used for personal items unrelated to Otis's care. And here's the kicker. Any attempt to misappropriate funds, moving money to shell companies, forging signatures, will be a breach of fiduciary duty. That is a felony. I saw their faces fall. You could almost watch their imagined lifestyles evaporate. They'd been planning to siphon off the caretaker stipend into personal accounts. They hadn't considered surveillance and legal teeth. The confrontation in court was the part people want to hear. The part you came here for. You know, those scenes where someone slams down evidence and everyone's mouth opens? We had one. The first day in front of Judge Morales in downtown Seattle, I felt like I was balancing on a cliff. Margaret set up our case like a chessboard. We file the will, introduce the deleted texts, show the bank transfers, and demonstrate a pattern of intent to defraud. She told me. The judge was a no-nonsense woman who had once presided over a multi-million-dollar fiduciary fraud case. She liked lawyers who didn't waste her time. When the messages came up on the screen, 47 deleted messages reconstructed by forensic experts, the courtroom murmured. Margaret read them aloud, one by one. He's so stupid, he'll never suspect. We need to create a fake medical bill. If he signs, we have access in a week. My sister's mouth moved, but no sound came out. That's forged, she said finally. Those messages are out of context. Then explain this, Margaret said, clicking to a new exhibit. A bank transfer confirmation to a shell company in Nevada, signed with a handwritten initial that matched my sister's signature samples. Explain this internal memo from the family accountant. My sister's attorney stood and said, Objection, hearsay. The judge waved him off. I'll admit the documents. Counsel, this courtroom is not a newsroom. Tell me who did what. Your Honor, these texts and transfers show a coordinated plan to access assets through false caretaking arrangements and fraudulent transfers. They plan to use my client's illness to justify the transfers. They've been recording discussions about settling the trust and staging medical expenses for 2 years. Margaret said 2 years like it was a scalpel, and the words landed like they were meant to. 2 years of lies, I said. I don't even remember raising my voice, but it echoed. The judge looked at me like she wanted to ask questions. She didn't need to. Paginated bank statements, the ring footage showing my sister meeting with the accountant outside my lawyer's office, the GPS pings from the car, everything lined up. Then we played the ring footage from last summer where my sister and the accountant were arranging a fake vet bill at a coffee shop in Bellevue. She pointed at a line item and said, "See, if we listed a specialized rehabilitation, the plan will approve it." The visual evidence was brutal because it showed their faces while they actively planned. The room gasped. My mother fainted back into her chair. The hypocrisy smelled like bleach. According to this disclosure, the judge said, reading from a folder Margaret handed up, the current accessible accounts under Mr. Vale's control are frozen pending further investigation. My sister's eyes widened. It was like a sequel to the death scene of their dreams. It wasn't enough. My brother's lawyer then introduced the conservatorship claim again. He argued that because of my diagnosis, I lacked capacity, and thus the trust could be contested. For a terrifying 5 minutes, it looked like we'd been cornered. Everyone in the courtroom held their breath. I felt myself lean back like I might topple. But then Margaret called the private investigator. He testified about being approached and threatened by my sister after she discovered his contact. We had a hidden recorder where she said, "You play along and we'll make sure your company gets the city landscaping contract." The prosecutor, unexpected but helpful, filed a criminal complaint for attempted bribery. The judge listened, then slammed her gavel. "I will not entertain a conservatorship motion predicated on fraud and undue influence," she barked. The court will appoint a neutral trustee for the pet trust with an independent forensic auditor to review all disbursements. Additionally, I'm authorizing a temporary restraining order against any party attempting to contact or influence the beneficiaries, including Otis, she smiled, who appears to be in good health. You could have heard a pin drop. My family had thought they could charm system, but the law has ways of closing when you pull her hair. The final crushing blow was this. The trustee we named had the authority to ban any of my immediate family from being caregivers if there was evidence of breach. The trustee's first act was to demand copies of all receipts and to require a background check. My sister's boutique bills, luxury trips listed as consulting, and an unauthorized transfer to a Belize account, all of it was exposed. In the days that followed, headlines in local Seattle papers called it the Otis Estate Scandal. I have the screenshots if you don't believe me. The court documents are public record. You can look them up. My sister lost her job at the family company after the board voted to dissolve her executive privileges. My mother, who had been the public face of the family charity, resigned amid calls for her removal. My brother tried to sell his condo in Bellevue and found the escrow halted. Some people said we went too far. Some people posted in comments, "What a stunt, leaving everything to a dog." But here's the thing. The trust wasn't about the dog having a Gucci collar. It was about accountability. It was a legal mechanism that turned their greed into a transparent ledger, one that could be audited, one that forbade theft under penalty of law. "You're not angry anymore," one of my friends said when we sat on the shore of Lake Washington with Otis between us. "You're pissed, sure. But you found a way to make them play by rules they thought didn't apply." "I'm not angry anymore," I said aloud, tasting the weight of those words. "I'm just done." Did I have regrets? Sometimes. The diagnosis meant there were nights I pictured Otis sitting in a silent house, waiting for my footsteps that wouldn't come. But the trust appointed a caregiver I trusted, Eliza's cousin, who had been my dog-walking neighbor for years, and set up a living stipend for me to spend on travel. In the Months I had. I used some of the trust's contingency funds to travel to Aspen and sit in the sun and feel the world tilt back into a softer place. What I did next surprised even some of my friends. I didn't spend my remaining time on petty luxuries. I used it to set up a foundation with a modest slice of the estate for animal welfare and for survivors of elder financial abuse. The money that could have fed greed instead created a hotline and a legal fund for people targeted by predatory family schemes. That was satisfying in a way riches never were. 6 months later, I ran into my sister in downtown Seattle. She was standing outside a boutique, folding a scarf, looking small. She didn't look at me. She was no longer wearing the Armani she used to have. I don't gloat in person. Humiliation is best delivered by the slow burn of consequences. But I will say the scene felt like justice. The real victory wasn't that they were humiliated or that they lost access to money. The real victory was in the precedent. I remember Judge Morales saying, "This court will not be a tool for familial theft. If you think because of an illness you can take advantage of someone, you are mistaken." So here's the part you need to answer for me. Was I wrong to weaponize my dying? Did I cross a line using the law like a scalpel? Tell me I'm not crazy for what I did next. I made sure my final act protected a nonverbal creature and held people accountable. Was it too cruel? Or was it the most honest way to get what I needed? Peace. Would you have told them you were dying? Would you have left everything to a dog? Would you have trusted the courts to certify justice? Or tried to do it yourself in more public ways? Little did they know, the dog would be the judge they couldn't bribe. If you're still with me, if this story made your chest tighten or made you want to laugh at poetic justice, drop your thoughts below. Have you ever felt used by your family like I did? What would you have done in my shoes? Was I right to use the law and a pet trust as my tool, or should I have handled it differently? If you want to see the screenshots, I can post them. If you think those texts are fake, look up the public filings in King County. The case is on record. Security footage doesn't lie, and neither does a ledger. Some people say revenge is petty. I say accountability is necessary. I didn't choose to be dying, but I chose how my death would be handled. I chose to prevent theft, to create a legacy that helped others, and to make sure that anyone who tried to line their pockets with my name faced consequences. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories of justice served, especially the ones where the underdog wins and the villains get what's coming, subscribe and hit that bell. I've got dozens more like this one.